Let's move on to Focus. And today we have a report on the #1 asylum seeker population of France, the Sudanese. Many are from the western Darfur region, where a continuing conflict has killed at least 300,000 people and displaced about 2 million. Omar al-Bashir, who's ruled Sudan with an iron fist for more than 25 years, is wanted by the International Criminal Court for genocide charges linked to that conflict. France 24 reporters went to see what it's like for Sudanese asylum seekers once they reach France.
A sparring session is the perfect way to unwind for these asylum seekers newly arrived in France. Mugadam is Sudanese. He lives here with his former travel companions.
I left my country with people I didn't know. We traveled together and we became friends. They're like brothers.
This centre in the La Chapelle area of Paris opened at the end of 2016 in a disused building, a pilot measure by the city's mayor. 450 beds occupied by asylum seekers from all over the world before they apply for legal residency. Sudanese make up more than half of the borders here.
These are young men, around 24, 25 years old. Many are from the Darfur region. Often they experienced tragedy and violence, which pushed them on their journey to exile.
Newcomers benefit from administrative, medical and psychological help. They're housed and fed for a maximum of 2 weeks before being referred to other reception facilities.
This is my room for another few days. This is my bed. There are 5 of us in this room.
Jafar is one of the 5 Sudanese employed by the centre. After several years in the UK, he was deported before obtaining a residence permit in France. Today he serves as a liaison for the asylum seekers.
In Sudan there is a war and there is no instability. And in front of them there is a Sahara, there is the Mediterranean Sea. So they caught in dilemma. They don't have no choice. Everybody tell us, you know, we see here, say, I don't have a choice. If I stay in Sudan, I would probably die.
The Sudanese topped the list of asylum applications in France in 2015 and 2016. Today, nearly 15,000 have a residence permit. The UK has long been their preferred destination, but the closure of the so-called Calais jungle and the tightening of border checks have complicated matters. Around the centre, the migrant camps have disappeared since last summer, and a massive police presence aims to prevent their reappearance. But the Sudanese continue to arrive in huge numbers in the north of Paris, and the centre at La Chapelle is overwhelmed. These young people crossed the Italian border a few days ago.
As soon as I arrived in Paris, I went to the center. They gave me an appointment, but only 45 days later. So in the meantime, I sleep in the street. It's really hard.
It took me months to get to France. It was really hard. I finally arrived, but I see all the Sudanese are sleeping in the street. Now I'm one of them, and I'm scared.
At nightfall, charities take turns handing out food around the neighbourhoods. Nearly 60% of Sudanese asylum seekers are allowed to stay. But others fear being sent back to Italy, Europe's main port of entry, or even being deported to their country of origin. In just a few years, a Sudanese neighbourhood has sprung up near La Chapelle. Its shops, grocery stores and restaurants have become a home from home for newly arrived migrants. Abdelaziz moved to France at the end of 2010. He opened his phone store just 3 months ago.
The Sudanese you'll find around here have learned the French language. They've started to work, they have businesses, restaurants. They're integrating into French society. All this is helping them clear their minds.
And the stream of candidates is not about to dry up. For 15 years now, war has ravaged Darfur and spread to other provinces of Sudan, killing more than 300,000 according to the UN, with millions more displaced. Rebel groups are fighting the authoritarian regime of Omar al-Bashir, who's accused of ethnic cleansing. The International Criminal Court still hopes to try the Sudanese president for genocide and crimes against humanity. We catch up with Jafar, the migrant centre employee. He's from Darfur and says that his father and uncle were murdered during a roundup.
The bullet that came to kill my father, it wasn't a random bullet, no. It wasn't a local guy who decided to go and shoot, no. People, army with the uniform, came to pick this individual by names and they assassinate them in cold blood.
Jafar is hoping for regime change in Khartoum and isn't afraid to say it.
We are in a stage of not just wanting to change this regime to go and face the charges that are waiting for them. No. A radical change from the grass that will lead to the secular society of Sudan. Otherwise, no, we're not having anything.
A recurrent theme amongst Darfur's exiles, traumatized by an interminable war and becoming increasingly politicized.
For more on this, I'm now joined in the studio by François Germain, a migration expert who teaches at the University of Liège. Hello, thank you very much for coming in. If we could start off by talking about what drives people to leave Sudan. So there's the conflict in Darfur, but what about other reasons and what's the appeal of France?
Well, let's be clear. The key reason is a bloody dictatorship by Omar al-Bashir. This dictator is under a warrant from the International Criminal Court for genocide and crime against humanity. So any ethnic minority or political opponent need to flee the country and find asylum somewhere else, sometimes in France.
But we saw in the report that, if I can say, only about 60% of asylum seekers from Sudan are successful. What happens to the rest?
Well, the remaining 40% become sans-papiers, that is, undocumented migrants. So either they will stay in France or they will try their luck somewhere else, or they will get deported back to Sudan. And it should be said that between 2014 and 2016, the French state has allowed the secret police of Sudan to come and identify directly in France political opponents so they can be deported directly back to Sudan. 200 people, 200 Sudanese have been deported back to Sudan, and nobody knows what has happened to them. So this is a very serious breach of international law, since the French state, the French authorities, have officially cooperated with the secret police of a dictatorship whose leading man is under a warrant from the International Criminal Court.
Now, we saw that there are people who've opened up shops who are learning to speak French. How well integrated would you say Sudanese asylum seekers are, perhaps compared to Afghans or Syrians?
Well, it's a relatively new community. I mean, the preferred destination of Sudanese asylum seekers used to be Britain until the Calais jungle was closed down.
Why was that?
Because they have relatives and family members in the UK, also because they speak English and they reckon that their chances of integrating will be better if they speak the language of the country already. And also they might find a safer place in the UK when you know that the Sudanese police of al-Bashir is investigating and trying to identify them when they're in France.
And what about their journey? Is there a particular route that they tend to take? Do they go through Libya?
Yeah, well, most of them go through Libya. That's the case of most African migrants at the moment. And then they arrive in Italy. Some of them will transit through the Roya Valley. And many of them would end up in the jungle near Calais until it has closed down. And now they end up in the north of Paris, near the neighborhood of La Chapelle.
Just going back to what you were saying about the French, allowing then police from Sudan to come onto French territory to take people back who are supposedly political opponents, how is that even allowed to happen? And how can you send them back to a country where there's a leader accused of genocide?
That's absolutely not allowed to happen. That's a state scandal. And it was discovered only this year because Belgium has entered the same kind of cooperation agreement with al-Bashir regime. There was an international outcry in Belgium. The Belgian justice has forbidden any deportation from Sudanese until further notice. And the justification of the Belgian authorities was simply to say, well, look, the French have done the same 2 years ago, so why couldn't we? And this is how it was discovered that this cooperation existed between the French authorities and the Sudanese authorities between 2014 and 2016.
But how widely known is this? Has there been a drop in the number of people arriving from Sudan to France or Belgium because of that?
Let's be clear, this has been a secret operation. As I said, this is forbidden under international law. So clearly, the French French authorities made no publicity about this. This has been a secret covert operation conducted by the French authorities with the cooperation of Sudanese secret police.
Okay, so just to widen things out a little bit, not just talking about Sudanese asylum seekers, but France's migration policy more generally, how has it changed under the new president, Emmanuel Macron?
Well, there have been lots of good intentions. The problem is that the situations in Calais, for example, has worsened. The humanitarian conditions are now worse than they were when the jungle of Calais was still open. So I would say that there is a huge discrepancy, a huge gap between the good intentions that are proclaimed by the president and the day-to-day actions of the French police and of the French Ministry of the Interior.
So you're better off having an official camp, because once you dismantle it and people stay in the area anyway, they're not well looked after.
Well, Calais, whatever you do, will remain close to the UK border. They're just 30 kilometers apart. So Calais will remain a transit point for migrants and asylum seekers wanting to try their luck in the UK. So whatever you do, whatever police operation you lead, there will always be migrants in Calais. And so there needs to be a humanitarian center to provide them with basic human life conditions.
So just briefly, because we're running out of time, can we still talk of a migration crisis?
Yes, we can still talk of a migration crisis, but I would rather say that it's a political crisis. The number of arrivals to Europe has dropped. It has been divided by 3 this year compared to last year. But the number of people drowning in the Mediterranean remains incredibly high. More than 5,000 people will perish in the Mediterranean this year, which means that 2017 will be the deadliest year on record. So the humanitarian drama, the tragedy, is still there, unfortunately.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for coming in to shed some light on that situation. François Germain. And thank you for watching. I'll be back at the top of the hour. Stay tuned to France 24.